The last element that we need for our design is the actual progress bar that's going to mark where they are throughout these checkpoints. And I'm going to do this just using a rectangle and having it fill up kind of like a progress or a loading bar. And I want it to be the right height between these two divider lines. So I'm just going to click and drag with my rectangle tool between these two to get the height. I'm not really worried about the width right now. I'll just let go there so that I know that I get the correct height, which is around 60 pixels. And that makes sense. We were spreading these text layers out 60 pixels apart. So I'm just going to unlink the width and the height and change that to around 60. I also don't need this fill color to be a gradient, so I'm just going to change it over to a solid color and take off the stroke. Now, the way that I'm going to go about animating this is using the scale property, and that's kind of essential to how I'm going to make this reusable and editable in a way that doesn't take a lot of work while only having a single source element. So I realize that's probably confusing, so let's just start making it. I'm first going to just size this out on the width so that it fills the space that I want. So I'm going to click and drag while holding Shift till it's over here and just spread out that width with the rectangle one selected, grab the width and increase that. That's probably about the width that I want. So we'll just say 670 by 60. Then I'll select that layer and pre-compose it by going up to Layer, down to Pre-compose, and I'll rename this Progress Bar and click OK. Now I'll go into that progress bar and I want to size the comp to this rectangle, but I want it to be absolutely precise. So I'm going to first center it in my comp by pressing Controller Command plus the Home key. You can also use the Align panel to do the horizontal and vertical alignment. And then I just want to change my comp size to match the size of that box, which was 670 by 60 pixels. So I'll go up to Composition, Composition Settings, and resize this to 670 by 60 pixels and click OK. Now I can be sure that my comp is exactly the same size as the shape layer. Now, like I said, I want this to look like a progress bar, like it's scaling up from the left. That's exactly how I want to animate it, using the scale. So I need to move that anchor point to the left side of this layer. I'll just grab the anchor point tool, click and drag on that anchor point and hold down Controller Command to snap this to the left edge. Now I can scale this up using the keyframe. So let's go to the start of the comp and set a scale keyframe here in the properties panel and move that forward, let's say about a second, and then unlink the X and Y on the scale property and change the X to 0. So now it's going to animate out from the left edge, and I can ease those two keyframes with F9, go into the graph editor and increase the influence on both of them. Now it's going to be a lot snappier, nice little progress bar animation. I'll jump back out of my graph editor. And the way I'm going to make this editable and reusable in the other comp is by attaching this to a null object so I can have a second layer of scale. So first let me rename this Progress Fill. Then I'll make a new null object, Layer New Null Object, and I'll rename this layer Progress Percentage and make sure that that null object is also aligned to the left edge. So I'll click and drag while holding Controller Command and snap it to the left edge, and then parent this shape layer to the null object. Now I've got the animation from 0 to 100% on the fill layer, but I also have a second layer of control. If I bring up the scale by pressing S and unlink the X and Y, I can scale that up by any percentage. So if I only wanted this to land at 50%, I could change that value to 50, and now it's going to animate from 0 to 50%. Because this layer is taking on that 50% parent transformation. And I realize that's not really an explanation as to how we're going to make this re-editable, but it will all make sense in a little bit. First, I'm just going to set this back to 100%, and I want to style this a little bit because I don't want it to be this white color. Instead, I'd like it to be the same color as this divider line. So if I go back to this comp and just click on the fill color for the stroke, I can copy this little code right here that has a hashtag. This is called the hex code for this specific color. So I'll just copy that, jump back to my progress bar and change the fill color here by pasting that hex code and click OK. Now I know that's exactly the same color. The next thing I want to do is duplicate this progress fill and rename it progress dashes. And I want to give this layer a little bit of texture. So first I'm just going to solo the layer, so that's the only thing I'm looking at. And then we're going to come over to the effects and presets and search for this effect, Venetian blinds. This effect is a transition effect, and if I apply it, this transition completion property allows you to kind of wipe it off in this way that kind of looks like blinds. You can control the angle, the width, the softness even. I'll reset that all back to its default because I want it to be aligned to that 0 degrees. I'll change the transition completion up to 50% though and turn the width down to around here. So now I have a dashed line. And if I press U, I still have those same scale keyframes. So it looks like those dashes are filling up. That's great. Now I don't want this parented to this null object. So I'm going to just remove that parent link. And then I'll unsolo the layer to show that it really just disappears. I can't see it because it's exactly the same color as what's below it. But if we come over to this column right here, the modes or the blending modes, again, if you don't see that, just toggle this switch right here, click on the button till you see the modes. This is a list of blend modes. They all allow this layer to mix its colors with layers below it in various different ways. There's too many to cover in this class, but the one that I'm after is called Add. So I'm just gonna select that for the progress dashes layer. And now you can see that those dashes are blending on top of the other layer and making it brighter. But if I were to pull back the scale on the X for the progress fill, then it's going to remain the original color because there's nothing to blend. And this creates a pretty cool effect. Now I want to turn the opacity of both of these layers down. So I'm going to select both and just grab the opacity property here and dial them back. So maybe around the 50% mark. And instead of having both of these layers animate at the exact same time, I want the dashes to come out first and then the progress fill. So let's just scoot that forward in time about 2 frames, and we have 2 separate layers animating now in time. Now we can go back to the standings comp and align this where it needs to be. So because this is sized exactly to the rectangle, the comp itself is sized to the rectangle, I can click and drag near the right corner while holding Control and snap it to other layers in the comp. So let me zoom in nice and close, and I'll just shift this over a little bit. Now, obviously there's not a skew on this layer, but I can fix that and reintroduce that skew using an effect. So I'm gonna search again for another effect called a transform. This is a distortion effect that just gives you another layer of transform controls. They just exist in this effect form instead of down here in the transform controls for the layer. It's kind of like having shape group transform controls in a shape layer. The nice thing is it gives us access to the skew. So I could increase that to 6 and it's not going to exactly do what we need because I need to change the skew axis. It needs to be changed to 90 degrees in order to match the skew that we have going on in the rest of our comp. Now let's just align the endpoint of this layer to this point in time using the left square bracket. And I'm once again gonna relabel this to something different. Let's say yellow, so it stands out really clearly. And just like I have the add blend mode inside this pre-comp with those 2 layers blending on top of each other, I can change the blend mode in this comp as well to add, and it's gonna make it look a little bit brighter and blend into the background and feel a little bit more cohesive. I like the way that looks, but I'm just noticing I actually put it on the second line. This really should be up at the top. So I'm just gonna click and drag again while holding Control, and that will snap right to that top edge. I just need to make sure that it's aligned to the right edge of these divider lines. So I'll just scoot it over while holding Shift, and there we go. Now that's aligned to that edge. Then I'll just add the number 1 after the progress bar title and duplicate this and start offsetting all of these layers. So I'm gonna click and drag while holding Control to snap it there and align that right edge. And I'll just continue this process all the way down. Duplicate, click and drag while holding Control and align it to the right edge of the divider. Just nudge this one in a little bit and that should do it. Great, now I've got all those progress bars. They're all animating at the exact same time, so let's offset them. This time, why don't we shift them 2 frames at a time? So I'll go forward 2 frames, deselect 2 more frames, and see how this affects the staggered animation. There we go. I'll play this section back, and now they're all offset. That looks great. Now, I obviously don't want all of these to be filled up, and I also don't want all of these checkpoints to be the same number. And we're actually gonna use the same feature of After Effects to customize both of those problems. Let's start with the checkpoints because I think it's a little bit easier to see. I'm just gonna shift this over a little bit, and I'm gonna double click into this comp. There's a panel in After Effects called the Essential Graphics panel. And if you're familiar with MOGRTs inside of Premiere or motion graphics templates, the Essential Graphics panel is what allows you to create those MOGRTs. but you don't actually have to export them as MOGRTs to take advantage of this panel in After Effects. So I went up to a window, down to Essential Graphics to get this panel, and I docked it right to the side of my comp. What I'm able to do is go into this text layer, into the text controls, and find the source text property, and just click and drag that up into the Essential Graphics panel. That's gonna create a new set of controls, and I'm just gonna give it a name, map number. And this property on the left is what the label for this control will be. So I'm going to just call this map number again. And right here, whatever I type in here is what's going to be typed into this text layer. So if I typed in 2, that's going to update. Now I don't want that to change in this comp, so let me undo. But what's really cool about this is that if I come back to my standings comp now, every one of these map markers now has an essential properties section that I can twirl open and find that map number property that I just created up here in the Essential Graphics panel. So if I go to the second marker into the essential properties and add a keyframe, this is going to allow me to customize the text. This is a new kind of keyframe. You've never seen this one before. It's a square. That means it's a hold keyframe. Hold keyframes just mean that there can't be any interpolation between one keyframe to the next. It's this value until the value changes. But now that there's a keyframe here, I can double click on it to edit the value and change this from a 1 to a 2 and click OK. And look what happened up here in my comp. Even though this is the exact same comp as the first instance, it's now showing a 2 instead of a 1. And I can do that for each one of these copies because of what I've set up in the Essential Graphics panel. So I'll go into the next one, set a keyframe, double click, change it to 3, and there we go. It doesn't matter where this hold keyframe is because I'm not gonna add any others. Another way to change this value is to just right click on the text and say edit value. That'll bring up the same menu. I just like having the convenience of adding that keyframe and being able to double click right on it. So that's what I'm gonna do. But I'll just add a keyframe for each one of these, change the value, and each one of these checkpoint markers is going to update with that number, whatever I type into this text box. So we'll do that for the last map number. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but they all animate exactly the same. They are offset in time, but we have access to that customization through our Essential Graphics. And I can do the exact same thing to the progress bars to allow us to customize how much each contestant has progressed. So let's jump into one of these pre-comps, into the progress bar. And in the Essential Graphics panel, we'll switch our primary comp to the progress bar comp. We'll rename this, same thing, progress bar, and then bring up the scale property for our null object. So grab that scale, click and drag it up into this comp, and I'll just call this progress percentage. Now if I jump back to my standings comp, I'll give myself a little bit more room so I can see here. The essential properties is showing up for each one of those, and what I can do is just use the X scale on that essential properties to scale down that null within the pre-comp. So why don't we say I want this to land on the 2 marker, then I could go into the second one, make that land on the 4, and completely customize how far each one of these contestants has progressed through that progress bar. And I might need to go forward in time a little bit so that I can actually align it to where it will resolve. But because of the way that we intelligently set up this comp's animation, I can very easily animate between 0 and whatever scale I set on this essential property. And this is why this graphic will be so easy to customize if we were to reuse it later on in the same program. Now that this is done, let me close the Essential Graphics panel, press U to bring up all the keyframes and U one more time to close it up just so all my layers are collapsed. And now we have this nice looking animation of all of those map markers followed by all of this progress. So why don't we bring these back a little bit, and maybe we'll even spread out the map markers so they take one more frame at a time to animate out. And that's a little bit more staggered. But now we have a very interesting looking animation for that side of the chart.